So I'm going to dive right into the deep end here a bit and do a teach and playthrough of 1846 as played with 4 players today. I just rolled a dice, and so I'm going to do a bit of an intro, a teach, kind of talk through how the beginning, for lack of a better word, draft, and then talk about kind of the major tenets in an 18XX, and then kind of what is specific about 1846 as a bit of a guide to the teach, and then we'll kind of go through specifics maybe as we play, and then I'll kind of expand on some things. So to start with, for a 4-player game, it ends in 2 ways. When the bank breaks, and the bank, I'm not sure if you can see it, there's poker chips over in this corner here. When the bank breaks, and that's for a 4-player game is 7,500, or when all but one player in this game in 1846 go bankrupt. In quite a lot of 18XX games, in general, it's usually when one player goes bankrupt, and then you just kind of tot up. But again, that kind of depends. So 1846 is kind of described as a, I suppose, as a gateway to 18XX. So it's fairly fast. You hit the ground running, and you start doing a lot of the things in a lot of the 18XX games that you might do a little bit later in the game, right from the start. And one of the key things that makes it great for complete novice 18XX players is the idea that there's a draft in quite a lot of the 18XX style games, like kind of especially 1830 branch. There's an initial auction, and obviously the downside of an auction is you need to know the value of those cards. Now, saying that, with 4 players in 1846, we've removed, and you randomly remove them, and I kind of won't go into those details maybe, unless I'm kind of quizzed about them, because they are explained very clearly in the rules. So we've got the Chesapeake and Ohio removed of the major companies, and this is just kind of, I've kind of kept this one out because you can see here, and we'll talk about them later, but there are 2 dots, and that means this is a double share, and this is why that's the directors, and then you've got the single share to see a comparison. Okay, so that's the kind of idea, and I'll explain what I mean by that. That's just to kind of explain those. And each of your major companies have a charter like this, and so you have somewhere for your money, and in this game your shares, so your shares will sit there, your trains that this company owns, and then any station tokens that are left on this board that aren't yet bought, and the ones that you have bought are on the board. Okay, so I can get rid of that. I will talk about the other major companies, but I think I should probably introduce the private companies first, and I'm going to do this in a fairly thorough manner, just so then you can kind of follow, because if you don't know what those do, then you're going to potentially struggle. Now, in 1846, for 4 players, you also remove, one of the, there's 3 with this diamond, and they're all major companies, and so you remove, for 4 players, you remove 1 of, and then there are 3 of the orange circles, and again you remove 1 of, and there's 3 of the blue squares, and you remove 1 of those. So this is how you kind of tighten the game up for the different number of players by removing a certain number of these and reducing the size of the bank. So we've got the Michigan Central, which has a few bits of information. It has a pictorial representation in the top corner. Okay, it says it's a private company. Obviously the name. it's got a price here, and one of the things in 1846 particularly is this is the price that you pay, and so you know up front that's the value of it. We will talk about buying private companies into major companies later, but this price is the key for the initial draft. You also have an income every operating round, and we haven't talked about operating rounds yet, but every operating round, the owner of this company will get this much money. Okay. And the Michigan Central is very similar to the Ohio and Indiana. Okay, and the way you know that they're similar is they have the same icon in the top corner. Okay, so they do functionally the same thing, but just in a different spot on the board. And so the Michigan Central in this game is not in the game, and so these are the two I've removed. And so the Michigan Central and the Ohio and Indiana, but reserve two squares on the 2 hexes on the board, and they are and when an owning company buys in the Michigan Central, okay, 2 things happen. Those 2 hexes are no longer reserved, and that company gets a one-time ability, in this case, to place 2 yellow tiles for free, and they don't count as your normal tile layer. And we'll kind of explain that as when we get to it, but that's just to tell you what that does. And those spaces, okay, are marked on the board. So the Michigan Central is here, you can't really see it, and the Ohio and Indiana are here. And again, it's quite small, but I will obviously keep that. So that's the Ohio, Indiana. So I'll kind of explain both of those. So this is in the game and this isn't in the game. Okay, so I'm going to put this way over here with the Chesapeake. We then have the other one that was taken out, and the reason I'm explaining this is so if you play your version, you will randomly decide and then you can know what they do. The Meat Packing Company, okay, for the owning corporation, okay, so again, sorry, I should say, it's got this little symbol which tells you what kind of pictorially it does. You've got the price, you've got the income, and then the owning corporation will place 2 tokens like this, okay. One on a square, on a hex with this symbol, okay, and that's why you've got that symbol in the corner so you can find it, and that's going to be Chicago or St. Louis, okay, and it says $30 on it, right? So you're adding $30 of revenue to that location, and then the other token goes on the owning corporation because at some point in the game the private companies will be removed, but the tokens will last one more phase, and again we'll explain that. Okay, but this is for this game, this is not in. Okay. So let's talk about the other ones that are in for this game. Okay, so we have, so we already know the Ohio, Indiana, so I won't talk about that one. We don't know the Steamboat Company, but it's very, very similar to the Meat Packing Company, but it does have one slight advantage. Okay, so again, it has a little token, 20, and this one is actually double-sided because depending on where you put it either with a 1 anchor or a 2 anchor, and it goes from 20 to 40. Okay. The advantage of the Steamboat Company over the Meat Packing Company is you can use its ability before it's bought in. And before it's bought in, at the beginning of every operating round, you can switch which company benefits. So only one company per operating round will get the additional 40 or 20 depending on where you put it. But you can move the company around. Now, it will eventually get bought in most likely, and once it's bought in, only the owning company can have it. So at that point, the tokens don't move. Okay. We then have the lake shoreline, and again this reserves, so you can see that it's got a green hex. This reserves 2 spots, one in Cleveland and one in Toledo. Okay. And this gives you a free green upgrade, so from a yellow to a green, and again we'll talk about that when we talk about tile laying. A free upgrade in those hexes, and those hexes are reserved for green upgrades until this is owned. But once it's used on one, you can't then use it on the other. Oh, my mistake. I will put a little note. Actually, the Lake Shoreline doesn't reserve the hexes. That's only for the Ohio and Indiana and the Michigan Central. Okay. Now, you probably can't see them on the board. There are some mountainous regions, okay, and they're the brown triangles that are pointing upwards. So there are some brown triangles there are some blue triangles pointing downwards, and there are some brown triangles pointing upwards. And for the brown triangles pointing upwards, you've got this little brown symbol here, and the Tunnel Blasting Company, for the owning corporation, you get a discount of $20, okay, on that hex, okay, and some of that $20 will be for the tile laying, and some of that will be for the connection cost. But it's wherever you see this triangle that it impacts. Okay, that's what's important. And again, it's got the price and it's got the income on there as well. Okay. We then move on to the ones I've just spoken about will change depending on the game you have. The four I've now got, okay, these are the four I'm now going to explain are the ones that are always in the game. Okay, and so probably the simplest to explain is the Chicago and Western Indiana. Okay, so you can see it's got this little, you won't know what that means, but it means the Chicago hex, because that's the Chicago hex has 4 dots on it. It's obviously got the price and the income, and this reserves one specific city, okay, over in Chicago, and it's got a C and WI on it, okay, and when the company so it's reserved until the company buys it in, and at that point it's no longer reserved, and the company has a one-time use of placing a bonus city token in that spot, okay, and again that token is going to be removed, as is this city, as is this a private company if it's not used, etc. Okay, like with the steamboat company and the meat packing company. Okay, so that one is always in. We have then got the mail contract. Okay, and the mail contract, again, it's got a little mail thing here. It's got $80 and an income of 0, so that's interesting. The one thing about the mail contract is this is the only private company that never leaves the game. Okay, so all the others at some point, and I'll again explain when that happens, will leave and be removed, regardless of who owns them. This one won't be. The only time this is removed is if it's not owned by a corporation at the point when private companies are removed. Okay, but it's very unlikely that will happen, because why wouldn't you? If you spend $80, you want to use it. So this explaining what this does kind of requires going into a little bit of explaining how trains work. Okay, so I've got this 4-6. Okay, and you can see it's called a 4-6 because they're here. And when you are counting up revenue, you count up. There are also kind of, for example, there are also things like 4 trains that have just got one number. When it's one number, the train visits that many stations. Okay, it can't skip any. It can't ignore any. It has to meet 4. It has to go to 4 stations. It can go to less than 4, but can't go to more than 4. And it will count the revenue on all of those stops. Okay, very simple. 4 stations, 4. When you get something like a 4-6 train, and there are 7-8 trains and 3-5 trains as well, this is the amount. This is the number of cities you count in your revenue, and this is the number of cities you may visit. So you can visit 6, and of those 6, you can count 4 locations. So you effectively get to ignore 2. With the mail contract, okay, and this is why I'm explaining this about the mail contract, is for the mail contract you count the biggest number, okay? But for the revenue locations you count the smallest number. So for here you would count all the 4 stations you're including, plus $10 for every station you visited, which is up to 6 in this case. If you don't have a route of 6, and you say you only have a route of 5, you will only get $50. You won't get the maximum the train can produce, you'll get the maximum the route could produce, okay? But don't forget that only the mail contract looks at the biggest number. The revenue amount is always with the smallest number, okay? And again, this is very specific to 1846. And then we have the final 2, and they're very, very similar because they are both, and you can see they're actually named different. So all the others are called private companies, and these are called independent railroads, okay? They each come with so you've got this 40 plus debt, okay? 40 plus 60 debt and 60 plus 80 debt, right? So the total price you will pay is going to be 100. And you can see there, it's going to be 140, right? So that's what goes to the bank from your treasury. The amount of money this company starts with is the bit without the debt. So that's 40 and here is 60, okay? That's very important because these will act in an operating round before the major companies, and that will make more sense in a second. Because they start with a little treasury that is separate from your money, and again I will explain what that means in a second. But they also start with a train each. Okay, so each one of them has a train. So they start off like a little mini company, and they can do all things that other companies can do, like laying track. Things they can't do are they can't buy private companies, and they can't buy trains. But apart from that, they pay out. They do it slightly differently from major companies there, but they do pay out, and so you'll be getting an income from them, and you'll be laying track for them. Okay, so these two are very interesting. Okay, so let's talk about how the draft works, because what I'll do is I'll set up the draft, and then as I then I'll start introducing the game in a proper manner once I've kind of set the standard. So I've got all of the different private companies and independent railroads together. Okay, for the normal game, you will then put a number of pass cards, and these are just numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's a 5th one for a 5th player. Okay. And they're all blank backed, and these will get shuffled in with all of the private companies, and I'm going to just shuffle those briefly, okay? And then you deal a certain number depending on the player order. Okay? A certain amount, okay? So for a 4-player game, I believe it's 6. Okay. And so at the moment, I've just randomly put player, because it doesn't really matter, because they're all dummy players anyway. So I've put player 1 as the priority deal, because he has this priority deal card. Okay, which has a little elephant on it, but I've upgraded my priority deal for all my 18xx with a little elephant. I don't know why the priority deal is an elephant. I think I've seen it in 1846 and 1853, and quite a few others, and obviously heavy cardboard have an elephant motif, so there's something about elephants that board gamers love. So I've got this as a little bit of a fanboy for heavy cardboard. Anyway, so so when you're doing the draft, it goes in reverse player order. Okay, so so it will go 4, 3, 2, 1, and then back, and then continue that way. And so player 4 has drawn 2 pass cards. He's drawn the Steamboat Company, the Tunnel Blasting Company, the Michigan Southern, and the Ohio Indiana, and he will pick one of those. Okay. Now, when it's a dummy game, all I'm going to probably do is deal them out randomly, and then just let the chips fall as they may, because I don't think me picking for each player is going to be very fun. But I will just explain how the drafting works. So he's going to pick one. Say, for example, the Steamboat Company is a very powerful one. Okay, for example. So I'm going to put that. Now I don't show anybody, so I put that face down in front of my money. I don't pay for it yet. Okay. I will take the remaining 5 and I'll shuffle those up. Okay. I will then place it below the other stack and then pass it along. Okay, and then then player 3 will then draw, and then he will have a look. And then player 3 has drawn the mail contract, 1 pass card, the Big 4, a 2nd pass card, the Chicago, Western Indiana, and the Lake Shoreline. And he likes to look at the mail contract, so he's going to put that down. Then he shuffles the remaining cards that he hasn't chosen and puts them on the bottom. So you can see this is a bit of a draft, but in quite a unique. I've never seen a draft like this. And again, so then player 2 will then pick 6 cards and then have a look through. So now, because things have been shuffled around, he's got the Big 4, a pass card, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan Southern, the Tunnel Blasting Company, and a pass card. And he decides that he is going to pass. So he will take one of the pass cards, which has always been an option. Okay, and then he will shuffle those and place those beneath. And then it's going to be player 1's turn. And then he's going to have 6 cards in hand. And then he's got the choice of the Michigan Southern, a pass card, a pass card, a pass card, the Lake Shoreline, and Chicago, Western Indiana. And I think at this point he will also pass. Okay. And so you can see that as they're taking pass cards, that the options to pass are reducing, because one of the key things about this draft is you have to take something, and that can often lead to some painful moments. So then it's back to player 4. So he's going to choose, and he remember has got the Steamboat Company, and so he's looking through, and the Big 4 works really well with the B&O. So he's going to pick the Big 4. And the reason he's picking the Big 4 is having a look on the board, looking where all the Steamboat Company symbols are. Wheeling has a double anchor. The B&O also has a kind of a parachute spot. We haven't really talked about major companies, but has a parachute spot in Cincinnati. And so then you can see that his strategy is slowly developing. And so, so even though we say that the 1846 is great for novices, there is actually quite a lot of depth and strategy even in just the draft. The draft almost can set you up for the game. And so then player 3 will then choose, and how player 3 has got 1 pass card. He's got the mail contract already set for him, and then he's got a few of these now. So he's going to pass. Okay, and then there's no point, now there's only 5 cards in the ones I'm putting and then 1 left. There's no point in shuffling them up because you're going to draw the whole lot anyway. So then we're on to player 2, and he's got a pass card, Chicago Western, Tunnel Blasting Company, the Michigan Southern, Ohio Indiana, and the Lakeshore. And he passed last time, so he probably wants to look at getting something now. And so he is going to take the Chicago Western Indiana. Okay, and then player 1 will take the Ohio and Indiana, because he took a pass card last time. And then, so player 4 currently has 2 companies. Okay, so he's actually going to pass because he doesn't want to spend much more money. And then we've got player 3 is going to take the Lake Shoreline. Player 2 is going to take the Tunnel Blasting Company. And when you're left with 1 card, okay, you flip it over, and if it's a pass card, or there are just pass cards left, that's it, the draft's over, there's no more drafting. If it is a company, any kind of company, it is laid face up and offered to the next player, who will be this player here, for face value, which is 140. Now the player 1, he's only spent 40, so he could actually afford that, but he's going to say, I pass. And then the Michigan Southern will lose $10 and then be offered to player 4. And it will just continue to go around. So 130, he passes. 120, he will pass. 110, he will pass, and it comes back to player 1 for 100, and he will then take it. Okay. And even though I said I'd go back and randomly shuffle them up, I'm just going to leave these because I think these all make for quite interesting layouts. So to recap, okay. Player 1 got the Michigan Southern for 100 and the Ohio Indiana. Okay, so he pays 140. Okay. So he pays 140, but the Michigan Southern starts with 60 in his treasury. So regardless of how much the Michigan Southern went for, it always starts with 60. So that's something else to take in mind. Okay. We've then got the player 2 got the Chicago Western Indiana and the Tunnel Blasting Company. And so he's paying 120. Okay. Then player 3 has got the mail contract and the Lake Shoreline, which again is 120. And player 4 has got the Big 4, which is 100, and the Steamboat Company, which is 40. So he needs to pay 140. So I have unintentionally done very, very even. There's all very even. There's no one who's overspent or kind of gone a bit above and beyond. And the Big 4 starts with $40 in its treasury. Okay. Now, so now we are set up to start the game. But before I do, let me explain a bit more in depth about how 18xx works in kind of in more of a genre, and then we'll kind of talk about the specifics of 1846. So in 18xx, the way you win the game is having the most personal wealth. Okay, and personal wealth is separate from any money in companies, whether they are independent railroads or the all the major railroads that are all up here in this corner. Okay, you can kind of see them. In this game, there were 6 that were available, and so 18xx are played in 2 types of rounds, where you have a stock round where players use personal funds to buy and sell stocks in the major companies, and then we have operating rounds where companies run, and then any relevant decisions of that company are chosen by the director, and the director is defined as a player who owns the controlling share of that company. Okay, and that is designated by the director's certificate. Now, in 1846, it's called the president's certificate. In other games, it's called the director's certificate. It's an interchangeable term. Okay, and when you are purchasing shares, especially initially when all the shares are in a company, and this is where 1846 diverts from some other games such as 1830, the money that you're spending goes directly into that company. And in 1846, the company is floated as soon as the first share, which is always going to be president's certificate, is bought. And remember I said earlier that the president's certificate counts as two. So when you're buying that first share, you pay double the price that you set. And again, you'll see that as we go. So when players are buying shares, they're putting money into the company, and then when companies run, they take that money and spend it on laying track, laying stations, and buying trains. And then when they run their trains, they can earn revenue, and then when they earn the revenue, they pay out on those shares, the dividends. And so then, depending on the percentage kind of control of that company that you own, you will earn that percentage of the revenue. If there are shares left in the company in 1846, that company will get that percentage of the revenue. If a company is doing well and it's earning more, at least its current share price, it will move up on the stock price. And if it's earning less, then it will move down on the stock price. And that's the general kind of feel of most 18xx games. There is an element of investing in companies, so putting money into companies, that money being then used to increase the wealth of those shareholders, both by paying out money, but also an element of stock appreciation. So stocks getting more and more valuable, because at the end of the game, you will count up your personal cash, which you have on hand. You will then tot up the value of all the shares that you own at their current stock price at the point when the game ends, okay? And that will then be your final score, okay? And in 1846, because so you can, let me just start that thought again, hopefully I'll get to cut that. So you will be buying shares and putting money in, but the other thing you can do on your turn is you can sell shares. And selling shares, you always sell to the stock market. At no point in any 18xx that I've ever seen is there trading but directly between players. It's always players to stock market or stock market to players, or in 1846's case, you can buy directly from the company. So with selling to the stock market, okay, there are some restrictions. So you can't ever have more than I thought it said it on the map. No, I think you can't ever have more than 50% of the shares in the stock market. So if there are 50% already there, you cannot put more, you cannot sell at that point. If you are the president and you sell, okay, your share price will go down one step. Now, if you sell 3 shares at that point, it will still only go down one step. Again, other 18xx games are different, but we'll talk about 1846. I don't want to overwhelm you, I'm just trying to give you an idea of an overview and a feel of 18xx. So when the president sells, the stocks will depreciate. Other players selling doesn't happen. In the first stock round, when only the president of a company can sell in 1846, other 18xx games you can't sell at all. So that's one thing that 1846 allows, is the early selling of shares, which makes it a much faster game. So in a stock round, you have a very specific order where you have to sell any number of shares that you would like and then buy one certificate. Okay, and now the reason I say certificate is you can buy the president's certificate, which is actually 2 shares, or you can buy another company. When you have the president's certificate, you are said to have the control of that company, and so we'll move the charter to under each player, and hopefully I've got enough space. I might have to shift things about if I run out, but hopefully we'll be able to survive. So I'll move the charter under the player. But even though the charter is near the player, that does not stop any other player buying shares of that company, either from the company or, if they are there, from the stock market. And if the share is available, you cannot refuse. No one can refuse that sale. And that's one of the things that 18xx often does, is almost encourage kind of cross investment. One other restriction that you can have is you can never own more than 60% of a particular company. Okay, and then the final restriction with certificates, and a certificate is any piece of paper, okay, like that. Just to note that these two, the trains for the independents, are not certificates because they are owned by that company. Okay, and these pass cards I'm only using, these actually would go back to the box at this point, I'm only using so I can remember which one is player 1, player 2, player 3, etc. Okay. So they again don't count. So in a 4-player game for 1846, the certificate limit, so the number of private companies that you own and certificate pieces of paper, is 12. Okay, so you can have 12 pieces of paper. So if you think I can have 60%, which is 5 certificates, that means that you could have two companies at 60%, and then only 2 more shares. So that's a consideration. Okay. When we move on to operating rounds, I will go through much more in depth about how operating rounds work, because I think seeing it is a much better way of teaching it than just talking about it and kind of offloading a huge amount of information that you're unlikely to remember. So we're going to start with the game of 1846, and the priority deal, which is this card and this elephant, was not randomly chosen by player 1. So he gets a choice, and he can float a company. He currently has $260, and he can float a company at a price between $40 and $150. But remember, the first share you buy is always going to be 2. So actually, if he's got 260, the most he could float a company for is half of that, which will be to obviously 130. Okay, so there's no 130 spots, so you'd have to float it at 124. Okay, in this case. Now, floating a company at 124 and only owning 2 shares makes it highly likely that he's going to have somebody else take the company off him. So he doesn't want to go that high price. Okay, but he might aim for something like 3 shares or 4 shares or 5 shares, depending on how conservative and how aggressive he feels the other players will be. So he could be really conservative and see if he could try and get 60% of a company to begin with. And so to get 60% of the company, he would need to float it at, so I think you need to float it at 40, which is fairly painful, because that means his company will only start with 6 times 40. Okay, so that's not ideal. The other consideration is he goes for something like 30 or 40%, and then gets a higher amount and hopes that no one else will be able to afford to overtake at that price. So there's some extra kind of iterations and strategies that you can employ. He is going to start. So his choices, the other thing he needs to think about is he's got the Michigan Southern, which starts all the way up here, okay? And he's got the Ohio Indiana, which is kind of reserves these 2 tiles. So really he wants either the Grand Trunk, because that really works well with the Michigan Southern, or he wants one of the New York Central, the Erie, the Pennsylvania Railroad, or the B&O. Okay, remember he can't pick Chesapeake. Okay, and the Illinois Central doesn't necessarily, it's not a bad choice, but it doesn't necessarily work. Now, the other consideration he has is some of these major companies have bonuses or special abilities. So I've already mentioned one of them. The B&O has a way of parachuting a station over to Cincinnati, because usually you can't, you have to connect straight there. But the B&O and the Pennsylvania Railroad both have the advantage of parachuting a station in. The Illinois Central has a number of spaces that are free to lay. And again, we haven't really talked about tile laying, but suffice to say, every tile you lay is $20, and so that will basically save the Illinois Central possibly $100. Now, any player can play, any company I should say, can play a tile into there. It just costs them the normal amount, but the Illinois Central would get the first tile they place there for free. So the yellow tiles there would be free. The other thing the Illinois Central gets, because it's kind of on its own on the left hand side, whereas there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 companies all on the right, it gets one extra value equal to the starting share price. So it gets 1 extra payment. So you start it at $100 per share, it will get $103 from the bank alongside the $200 that you float the company at, plus any other shares that I bought. So I think because of the Michigan Southern, he is going to purchase the Grand Trunk Railway. Okay, and he is going to purchase it for 100 and not 160, because that would be too much. He couldn't do that. So he's going to purchase it for 80 a share. Okay, so he puts 160 in the company and he takes the president's certificate. Okay, so he's got $100 left, and the way we mark that is we put a little token by 80, okay, for the Grand Trunk, and I'm going to put a little token at the top to mark the revenue paid out. Okay, and all that money that I paid for those shares goes directly into the company, because I bought the shares from that company. If I buy the shares from the stock market, the money goes back to the bank. Okay. So I bought my 1 certificate and then I passed my turn. And it's over to player 2. Now player 2 has the Chicago and Western Indiana, and he also has a tunnel blasting company. Now it's quite an unusual combination. Probably not my best strategic decisions, but I think it was the tunnel blasting company or the Michigan Southern at the time, so I think I didn't really have a lot of choice. So really I will probably want to be starting something like the Pennsylvania Railroad, the B&O, because those two are the ones that will benefit most from the tunnel blasting company. Because obviously the other one that does benefit quite a bit from it is the Grand Trunk, but that's already taken. I could obviously try and think about taking over the Grand Trunk. It would be fairly hard with the amount of money I've got. So I think I'm going to go for the Pennsylvania Railroad. The Pennsylvania Railroad has the obvious advantage of jumping into the middle of the map, because it can go from its home in Homewood, which is quite ironic, to Fort Wayne, which is right in the centre, so you've got a lot of control. And that also then helps me get to the Chicago Western Indiana, which is like a bit of a nice 1-2 there. Okay? And the other question is going to be, I've got 180. The other question will be, how much do I want to float this company for? Now, I don't have an independent railroad helping me out, so I kind of have to be a bit more conscientious with my money. So I've got 280. If I started it at if I started at 50, I could get 5 shares at 50, which would be 250. I could get 4 shares at 60. Yeah, I think I'm going to try and go for 5 shares at 50, because I want to kind of maintain control of it. So 5 shares at 50, so I'm going to put $100 in the bank, because I'm only allowed to buy 1 certificate, and then I'm taking the top off. Okay. Now I could have easily bought a Grand Trunk. Now the downside of buying a Grand Trunk at this point is the money that I'm putting in will go directly to helping the president of that company run that company better. So I'm kind of buying 1 portion to give somebody else 2 portions. So it's not necessarily that wise to buy too early in, but it's not a bad idea either. There's pros and cons for everything, which is why 18XX is such a fantastic game. So I've got the Lake Shoreline, who have the ability to upgrade Cleveland and Toledo. So I probably want to be going, and obviously the Grand Trunk is taken, so I probably want to be going for something like Erie for player 3 or Salamanca, because I kind of want to get to the Lake Shoreline quickly, and then when we get to phase 2, which we haven't really talked about yet, which I will kind of go briefly over between the stock round and the operating round. I kind of explain the phases, because that's more of an operating round thing. And then, so really, it's a choice between Erie and New York Central. Now, both of them have the only difference between the two, really, is that the Erie Railroad has a cheaper token to place in Erie, which, for me, isn't that special. So I think I'm probably going to take the New York Central, okay? Because it starts in a slightly nicer place than Erie. It has a better east connection, and again we'll kind of talk about that when we're running trains more, because it's slightly nicer and it just has less things in the way. Okay. Plus you can also upgrade Erie where you can't upgrade Salamanca. Okay, let's move these up a bit. So I'm going to take a double share of the New York Central. Now I need to decide how much I buy for. Now the other consideration is order of operation. So most operating rounds will run from the highest share price downwards, and that's a very typical 18xx mechanic. The first operating round, maybe to balance the game a little bit because of the draft, it runs in reverse operating round. So the slightly, you could say, weaker companies operate first in the first operating round only. So, do I want to go first in the first operating round by buying shares at 40? Do I want to go possibly third, or at least after the Pennsylvania, by buying at 50, or higher? Now the player 3 has 280, and I probably want to look to get 40 to 50% of the company, and so I think let's go for, let's try and get 40%. Okay, so I'm going to buy for 60, which will be, I need to do a little bit of money changing. Okay, and then I bought the New York Central. We then finally, last but not least, we get to player 4, and they've got the Lake Shoreline, the Steamboat Company, and the Big Four. Okay. Now, the Big Four does very well with the Illinois Central. It also does very well with the Baltimore and Ohio. So I would have said player 4's choice of company is probably going to be the Baltimore, Ohio, or Illinois Central. And because of the double dots in Wheeling, he's going to probably go for the Baltimore and Ohio. Okay. And he's gonna buy for, he's got 160, and he will he's going to slightly, I think probably shock people a little bit and go for a 40 share. So he's going to spend $80. Going to change some money. Okay, so he's going to do that. And then spend 50, 75, $80 to buy the Baltimore Railroad. Okay. And now, so he's bought. Now, you can never sell shares if you've got the president's certificate and no one else has two shares of a company. If they have 2 shares, you sell down to 1, and then you exchange the president's certificate with the other player. That is one way of offloading a company to another player. So at the moment, none of us can sell, which is the point. But what the Grand Trunk will do is he is going to buy, and I'm going to need to change up again. So he's going to buy for $80. For $80, a third certificate in the Grand Trunk. Okay, so that means now the Grand Trunk has 240 money to start to start buying trains and building track. Okay, so that's his turn. Then the Pennsylvania will go and he will buy a third share of the Pennsylvania Railroad for $50. Okay, and then Player 3 will buy for $60. So there. And then the Baltimore and Ohio will buy for 40. It will be, I don't know, and then he takes that token. And then the Grand Trunk will... So the Grand Trunk is back round, and he's only got $20, so he can't do anything. Pennsylvania has some more money, so we'll buy another share of Pennsylvania. Okay. The New York Central will buy another share of the New York Central. Okay, I'm just going to fix something. And then the Baltimore and Ohio will buy another 40 share. So that's going to be there. Okay. Grand Trunk has to pass. He could sell his one Grand Trunk, but I think he's going to hang on to it. Now, interestingly enough, if he sells, just from your point of view, if he sells, what will happen is he'll get $80, okay, and that comes from the bank, not from the company. Because he's the president, it will drop his share price, okay. But it will then actually mean he could then buy another share in something else or in the Grand Trunk. So you can kind of push companies and muck around with share prices. Now the only thing is, at the end of the stock round, any shares in the stock market will depreciate the stock price. So there is that factor. So he's going to hang fire. We've then got the got player 2 with the Pennsylvania, and he's going to then buy a 50. So he's got 50%, and he's got $30 left. So I think he's fairly happy. We've then got the New York Central, who's going to buy for 60. I need to change these up. Okay. For 60. So okay. And then, so there's the New York Central has 50%, and then the Baltimore and Ohio is going to spend another 40. That's going to be that there. That's going to be 25, 30, 40. And spend that there. Okay. Just going to change up and fix something there. And so the Baltimore and Ohio buys that there. So now we go back to the Grand Trunk. He's going to pass. The Pennsylvania can't buy anymore. The New York Central has only got 40, so he could buy a Baltimore and Ohio, which he will do. Okay. So So he's got $25, $30, $40 there. And then the Baltimore and Ohio's only got $30, so he's going to hang fire. Okay. So that is the stock round. So what happens at the end of the stock round is you can see that some players can pass and then you can come back in, and that's always true. If everybody passes, the last player to act, okay, which was player 3, the player along from them, now game wise is kind of clockwise, but I always end up going counterclockwise. So, because I'm kind of reading left to right, I think probably. So the priority deal goes to the next player along from the last one who acted. So he bought the Baltimore and Ohio, everyone else passes, and so then this player 4 is the one that then gets it. Now we move on to operating round 1. Now the operating rounds go in an extremely strict order. But first, before we go into operating rounds, let me talk about phases. Now, I think probably universal to every 18xx game, you have a concept of phases, and I believe almost all of those games, I can't speak for everyone because they do vary quite a bit, but for the predominantly, those phases are controlled by the trains. Now the trains and the colours tend to be fairly universal. So you have yellow phase, which is always the first phase. You then have green, and then brown, and finally grey, or some people call it silver. Okay. And as the next, so when you're buying trains, you always buy from the lowest available, and then usually as soon as once these are all sold, as soon as the first train of the next type is bought, that immediately enters you into the next phase. And as the phases change, rules and certain limitations will either be introduced or removed. And so in 1846, the only restriction that is stated is the train limit for the major companies is 4. So it's a hard limit. So if you ever have 4 trains, you cannot buy another train. So you can get what they call train locked. So you can't progress in the game because no one can buy trains, or at least you can't buy. So you're kind of at the mercy of other people. And we'll explain what that means kind of when we get to it. You then have, so phase 2, when you get into phase 2, the other limitation with phase 1 is you can only play yellow tiles, which are the basic tiles. In phase 2, the train limit is still 4, you can obviously buy green trains, and you may use your upgrade action to upgrade yellow tiles to green tiles. Now you always respect the upgrade order, so you can't go from blank tiles to green. You always have to go blank to yellow to green. Some of the tiles on the board are yellow, so those go directly to green. Some of the tiles are silver, they can't be upgraded because the silver is the last tile level. And then when you go from brown to green, okay, now this is where we can talk about phasing trains out. Now in some games, trains are removed immediately, okay? And so then suddenly you are left in the lurch. And one of the other key tenets of 18xx is the director is financially responsible for a company, and companies must always have a train, which translates to, if the company can't buy a train, you as a player will have to pay the rest. And these trains can get fairly expensive. And this is the way that players go bankrupt, is by being forced to have to buy a train and then not being able to. Okay, and there are some special rules that you employ when you go through that process. And if we see it in this game, I will talk them through it, but maybe I'll explain it at the end. The thing about 1846 is bankruptcy is highly unlikely, so the game will likely end with the bank breaking. Other 18xx games, that kind of pressure you get to be bankrupt is much higher, and you have to walk a much finer tightrope. The reason it's a bit nicer in 1846 is you have a concept of phasing a train out rather than what is called rusting a train. Rusting a train immediately removes that train from the game, okay? Whereas with 1846, you phase it out, which means that the train gets to run one more operating round. So at whatever point it was phased out, okay, it will survive until it runs once more, and then it's removed. So you get this kind of safety net action that if you are caught with your pants down, you can run once more. Now, saying that, with the 2 train, okay, they phase out in brown. If, and it'd be quite hard to do, but if they were phased out and hadn't run by grey, they are then removed immediately without compensation. Okay. The 3 trains, the 3 5s and the 4 trains, which are reversible, okay, and all the green, brown, and silver grey trains are reversible, are phased out in grey. Phased out in grey, and then you have the very beautiful word there, permanent. So these cannot be removed, okay, and neither can the 6s or the 7 and 8s. Okay. The other thing that happens in the brown phase, as soon as you enter it, remember we said that there was a point in the game where all the private companies and independent railroads are removed, and that is that point. And then when you go into the grey, okay, you obviously phase out the green trains. You remove any 2 trains, any yellow trains that are still available, but it's very unlikely that there will be. You would then remove the private company markers. So we said, if you remember all the way back at the beginning, that these markers are put out on the board, and that's when these markers are removed. They don't get removed when the card is removed, so they still function, okay? But they just can't be moved. When the steamboat company can, at the beginning of the operating round, even when it's brought in, you can't change the company, but you can change the location where it's being implemented, okay? And you can always do that up until it's removed from the game. So then now we're going to talk about kind of operating rounds. So, at the beginning of the operating round, the thing that most players forget, or at least seem to on the videos, is the privates pay out. Now the privates pay the person or the company that own it. So in this case, no privates have been bought in yet, they've not had the opportunity to. So all the players then get a bit of money. Okay? So looking at player 1, he will get $15. Okay? Player 2 will get 30. Player 3 will get 15. And player 4 will get 10. So privates are paid out. We then run the 2 independent railroads, and they always run in the same order. Okay? They always run Michigan Southern and then the Big 4. Okay? And now we're going to talk about tile laying. Now, when you're laying tiles, you always have to have a valid route from your station token to the hex that you want to lay in, which makes sense. As in, you have to be able to get there to lay there, right? So every tile, I think we've already said, costs $20 to lay or to upgrade. So you always have to pay 20. If there's a cost printed on the tile, or if the So if there's a cost printed on the tile in the centre, you pay the greater amount. So you either pay 20 or, for example, what would it be? H14 next to Huntingdon, you'd pay 60 because it's a 60 mountain, unless of course you had the diamond blasting company. If it's a cost between connections, okay, so between hexes, there are some mountains and rivers, depending on the tile. You only pay that cost when you complete the connection, okay? And that will again make more sense when we play it. So for example, Detroit, which is a special tile, it's got a letter Z, which means it upgrades following the Z tiles. So there are some special tiles that are labelled Z, and it will only Z tiles go on it. To upgrade Detroit costs 40 for the upgrade, because the tile has a little 40 for the estuary, but also to connect between Detroit and Windsor costs you 60, and every tile you can place on Detroit will require you to connect Windsor to Detroit. So to upgrade Detroit from yellow to green will cost you $100. Okay. Anyway, back to the Michigan Southern. I have $60 in my treasury. So and on your turn you can lay 2 yellow tiles or upgrade 1 tile and lay a yellow tile. So you always get a yellow tile and an upgrade or another yellow tile. Okay, so at the beginning of the game I can only lay yellow tiles, so most likely I am going to upgrade. I am going to upgrade, I'm not going to upgrade, I'm going to play 2 yellow tiles. I'm going to play a straight out of Detroit this way. Okay. And I'm going to play a curved city onto Port Huron. Okay. So when you place a tile on a blank space, you use just the normal track, which has very different varieties, but there's no revenue location on. When you place on a white dot, a large white dot, okay, you have a series of tiles that have a revenue amount, which is the amount of your money when you visit that space, but also a dot for any station markers. And so I'm going to place that on top of Port Huron. Okay. Now, for those players who know 1846, I'm not connecting Port Huron to Sarnia, so I don't need to pay the $40. Okay. Now, so I'm laying 2 tiles, and that will cost the Michigan Southern 40.